What is it? It is Monday the 23rd. Let's go, guy. Let's do it. Who cares if you're not ready? It's getting late in the day. All right. Well, anyways, it's the day after the 22nd. It's been a fine day. President Trump, I hope you're well. I know things are moving along in their cosmic way, and you're pondering things, and we're all pondering things, and yeah, we got to move. Sometimes you just got to move. Got to find the right path. I was looking at trying to look up the details of Rudy's your attempts to find the roots of the elections issues, the depth of fraud. I don't know. I think we got to move on. I said this before, and but it's not that you don't have some points regarding what went down over the last few years. But what I wanted to get into, because yesterday was the 22nd of November, and that always rings a bell with me, is sort of the coincidental nature of synchronous things. Now, some of you young people weren't around when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had their big election dispute back in 1800. Matter of fact, I wasn't around then either. You know, that was supposed to have been one of the most contentious elections of all time. But the strange thing was that Adams, who was the Federalist, and Jefferson, who was the Anti-Federalist, and both flawed human beings, dang them, you know, they kind of hated each other at that point. They started out as friends. Election 1800, Jefferson won. Adams' Alien and Sedition Act that actually threw a editor in a Vermont newspaper in jail for speaking out against the government. Anyways, Adams lost. Jefferson won. Somehow, over the years, they became friends again, and that was respectively, again, for you young people who don't know, George Washington was the first president of the United States. John Adams was the second president. John Adams was vice president under Washington, and Jefferson was the Secretary of State under Washington. Now, Washington was a pretty cool guy. You might not know this, but one of the things that Washington did, which is pretty impressive for anybody who studies history, is he kind of turned down, he believed in this notion of democracy, even though it was entirely experimental what was going on with the American Revolution. It kind of had its founding, I think, almost in a period of time that was sort of like the 1960s. And when I say that, I think in terms of the this kind of wave of enlightened thinking, writers, authors, there was just a great deal of creativity and things that were just pushing the envelope. And slavery, unfortunately, was still to be battled out and to be figured out. But there were a ton of ways which human beings were absolutely horrible to each other, not just because of race in those days, but because of anything, religion, etc. Sir Francis Drake, I mean, reading the history of Sir Francis Drake, how he, before he was even off on his overseas journeys across America to come to Marin County, that's exactly what he did. He came just looking to arrive at Marin County. You know, he'd already been taking part in some kind of slaughter of the English against the Scots up in Scotland. It was pretty horrendous. But this, and as far as we know, they were all like white people, and they just, women and children were just slaughtered. Inhumane. Getting back to Washington. So he was, his men said, George, bleep Congress, we're dying. Take power. Just be our man. And he turned them down. he turned his soldiers down. He said, "Guys, I'm surprised you don't know the." And I'm paraphrasing Pete Seeger, paraphrasing George Washington. I'm surprised you don't know the.
Never heard that.
Oh, it's a great story. You know, it was after Cornwallis had been beaten at Yorktown and sailed back to England, and King George just about gave up. But the peace treaty had not been signed, and Washington figured that until the peace treaty is signed, I can't let the army go back home. So they were camped out south of Newburgh, and George wrote a letter to Martha and said, "It's a beautiful place I'm living in, an old Dutch farmhouse on the edge of the river, and I got a beautiful view downriver through the mountains. Won't you come up and stay with me here?" So Martha came up and stayed with him almost a year, or maybe more than a year, in Newburgh. It was back in 1783, and the officers were very upset that they weren't getting paid. The Continental Congress was printing money that was not worth anything. That's why you still have a saying, "It's not worth a continental."
Oh, that's where it came from.
And the officers circulate a letter, "Dear General, won't you please take over the reins of government and bring some order to this country? We will follow wherever you lead." Well, Washington read the letter, and he called the officers together, and in very serious tone of voice, he says, "I'm surprised you do not know my Republican convictions. I did not spend 6 years fighting royalty just to set up a new royalty. I do not want to hear of such a suggestion again." And he dismissed them. And this was one reason the whole country loved him, because they knew that he could have taken over the government, but he refused to, and said he wanted to have a democracy. I still sing a song which was taught me when they marched down through New Jersey to take over Washington when the peace treaty was finally signed. They sang, "Doodle, doodle, doodle, dandy, cornstalk rum and a homemade brandy, Indian pudding and a pumpkin pie. That will make those Yankees fly." Boom, went the drums.
That's pretty good. Now I'd like to hear a little bit about this. You had this bright idea of having a boat sailing up and down the Hudson. I remember you referred to it as old.
Ended up living in America a lot, digressing a lot, going back to Adams and Jefferson. They healed their problems. They became good friends. To Aldous Huxley, who wrote a book called Breaking the World in the 1930s, Battle of 1800. He was really a brilliant thinker. 50 years to the day after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which both of them were part of, they died on that very same day in America. That very same day. And they were good friends. And this was huge news that went rippled across the country, as it were, in those days. And people felt like it was a message from some higher power of the rightness, 1958, magic of something of what this country began. Now, I'm jumping because of two other men who left the planet on the same day had something in common too. So I guess I'm going to start with.
Let's go a little forward. This English thing wasn't what I was really interested in.
Became an American citizen.
Writing about American political campaigns. You say all that is needed is money and a candidate who can be coached to look sincere. Political principles and plans for specific action have come to lose most of their importance. The personality of the candidate, the way he is projected by the advertising experts, are the things that really matter.
Well, this is, during the last campaign, there was a great deal of
1958
statement by the advertising managers of the campaign parties, this idea that the candidates had to be merchandised as though they were soap or toothpaste, and that you had to depend entirely on the personality. I mean, the personality is important, but there are certainly people with an extremely amiable personality, particularly on TV, who might not necessarily be very good in positions of political trust.
example, do you feel that men like Eisenhower, Stevenson, Nixon, with knowledge of forethought, were trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the American public?
No, but they were being advised by powerful advertising agencies who were making campaigns of a quite different kind from what had been made before. And I think we shall see probably all kinds of new devices coming into the picture. I mean, for example, this thing which got a good deal of publicity last autumn, subliminal projection.
Subliminal projection.
And as it stands, this thing, I think, is of no menace to us at the moment. But I was talking the other day to one of the people who has done most experimental work in the psychological laboratory with this, who was saying precisely this, that it is not at the moment a danger, but once you've established a principle that something works, you can be absolutely sure that the technology of it is going to improve steadily. And I mean, his view of the subject was that, well, maybe they will use it to some extent in the 1960 campaign, but they will probably use it a good deal and much more effectively in the 1964 campaign, because this is the kind of rate at which technology advances.
And we'll be persuaded to vote for a candidate that we do not know that we are being persuaded to vote for.
Exactly. I mean, this is
Been going on for quite a while.
Below the level of choice and reason.
It's not just subliminal
In
either.
regard to advertising, which you mentioned just a little ago, in your writing...
Mike Wallace, I believe, was the father of Chris Wallace,
which
you know.
controls most of our television and radio, advertising, newspaper advertising, and so forth. Why do you consistently attack the advertising agency?
Well, no, I think that advertisement plays a very necessary role, but the danger, it seems to me, in a democracy is this. I mean, what does a democracy depend on? A democracy depends on the individual voter making an intelligent and rational choice for what he regards as his enlightened self-interest in any given circumstance. But what these people are doing, I mean, what both for their particular purposes, the selling goods, and the dictatorial propagandists are doing, is to try to bypass the rational side of man and to appeal directly to these unconscious forces below the surface, so that you are, in a way, making nonsense of the whole democratic procedure, which is based on conscious choice on rational grounds.
Of course, well, maybe you have just answered this next question, because in your essay you write about television commercials, not just political commercials, but television commercials as such, and how, as you put it, today's children walk around singing beer commercials and toothpaste commercials.
All right, enough of that, Mike Wallace. But there's a lot. Let's just jump ahead. Let's just see what he says at the end as he wraps this up.
In a situation in which everybody is kept down, because I mean, they can certainly get their technological and scientific results on such a basis.
Well, the next time that I talk to you then, perhaps we should investigate further the possibility of the establishment of that kind of a society, where the drones work for the queen bees up above.
Well, but yes, but I must say I still believe in democracy. If we can make the best of the creative activities of the people on top, plus those of the people on the bottom, so much the better.
Mr. Huxley, I surely thank you for spending this half hour with us, and I wish you Godspeed, sir.
Thank you.
All right, well, Aldous Huxley, he wrote Brave New World in the 30s. He also wrote a book called The Doors of Perception. So Aldous got involved was one of the early explorers in consciousness and actually psychedelics, things that open the doors up. And speaking of the Doors, of course, but some of you know that the band out of L.A., the Doors, pulled their name based on Aldous Huxley's book called The Doors of Perception. And perception is what Aldous is talking about. And that subliminal stuff, you know what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about the news media and how, like, I would turn on CNN sometimes and, and I know Chris Cuomo and Rachel Maddow, they're earnest and hardworking people, strictly following their beliefs. But just that subliminal way of, over the last 4 years, of this depth of anxiety or histrionics or this message of extraordinary upset over everything that Trump did. It just reminds me of the how this it wasn't just subliminal, it just driving this anxiety into the American people. Let's see what JFK had to say. Now, the combination of JFK and Aldous Huxley is pretty fast.
Unanimous, and the advice was wrong. So that finally, and I was responsible. So it finally comes down that no matter how many advisors you have, frequently they are divided, and the president must finally choose. The other point is something that President Eisenhower said to me in January 19th. He said, "There are no easy matters will ever come to you as president. If they're easy, they will be settled at a lower level. So the matters that finally come to you as president are always the difficult matters, the matters which carry with them large implications." So this contributes to some of the burdens of the office of the presidency, which other presidents have commented on.
During the Cuban crisis, there was some problem, which you're apparently familiar with and bored with by now, about the possibility of a president talking in very private and secret conversations with his advisors, and that somehow leaking out. Do you think that this is going to inhibit the free, frank flow of advice that every president has to have?
No, I think it's unfortunate when there's sort of conversations, but there are, 1,300 reporters accredited to the White House alone. There are, I suppose, 100 or 150 people who are familiar with what goes on because in the Security Council meetings, in one way or another, you've got the people who are actually there, and you've got others who are given instructions as a result of the decisions there, and I suppose people do talk, and then as I said at the time of the Cuban disaster of April 61, that the success is 100 fathers and defeats an orphan. I suppose when something goes well, there's more tendency to talk at all levels, and frequently the reports are inaccurate. I would say the security is pretty good at the National Security Council. It's unfortunate when it's breached.
Is it true that during your first year, sir, you would get on the phone personally to the State Department and try to get a response to some inquiry that had been made?
Yes, I still do that when I can, because it's, I think there's a great tendency in government to have papers stay on desks too long. And it seems to me that's one really of a function. After all, the president can't administer a department, but at least he can be a stimulant.
Do you recall any response that you received from somebody who wasn't suspecting a phone call in the State Department? Any specific response somebody made to you?
No, they always respond. They always say yes, but it takes a little while to get. You know, after I met Mr. Khrushchev at Vienna, and they gave us an aid memoir. It took me many weeks to get our answer out through the State Department, coordinate with the British, the French, and the Germans. It took much too long. It seems to me we've been able to speed it up, but this is a constant problem in various departments. There are so many interests that are involved in any decision. No matter whether the decision is about Africa or Asia, it involves the Europe's desk, it involves the desk of the place, it involves the Defense Department, it might involve the CIA, it frequently involves the Treasury, it might involve the World Bank, or, it involves the United Nations delegation. So it seems to me that one of the functions of the president is try to have it move with more speed. Otherwise, you can wait while the world collapses.
You once said that you were reading more and enjoying it less. Are you still as avid a newspaper reader, magazine? I remember those of us who traveled with you on the campaign, a magazine wasn't safe around you. Would you?
Oh, it is. No. I think it's invaluable, even though it may cause you it's never pleasant to be reading things frequently that are not agreeable news, but I would say that it's an invaluable arm of the presidency as a check, really, on what's going on in administration. And more things come to my attention that cause me either concern or give me information. So I would think that Mr. Khrushchev, operating a totalitarian system, which has many advantages as far as being able to move in secret and all the rest, there's a terrific disadvantage not having the abrasive quality of the press applied to you daily to an administration.
When you have,
even though we never like it, and even though we don't, even though we wish they didn't write it, and even though we disapprove, there isn't any doubt that we couldn't do the job at all in a free society without a very, very active press. Now, on the other hand, the press has the responsibility not to distort things for political purposes, not to just take some news in order to prove a political point. Seems to me their obligation is to be as tough as they can on administration, but do it in a way which is directed towards getting as close to the truth as they can get, and not merely because of some political motivation.
Mr. President, in the light of the election returns, which at the congressional level at least were certainly a defeat for the Republican hopes, how do you measure your chances for significant success domestically in the Congress just ahead?
Well, I think we'll be in about the same position of the last 2 years. I think that, as I say, what we have that's controversial will be very closely contested.
Did the complexion of the House change a little bit by these shifts to
I would say it's
redistricting?
slightly against us more than it was. We're not quite as good shape as we was for the last 2 years, but we're about where we were the last 2 years, which means every vote will be 3 or 4 votes either way, winning or losing.
Do you have a very crucial vote at the outset on this Rules Committee fight again, do you think? And
I hope